the foreign minister of Iran has published actually an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. What's been interesting is he's been able to get some airtime. Abbas Arachi in Fox News, now on the Wall Street Journal, he says, unlike the restraint we showed in 2025, this time we have no qualms about firing back with all we have. And we can get a little bit more from the Credo because there is a paywall that's actually impenetrable when it comes to Wall Street Journal. But in this warning, he says, unlike the restraint Iran showed in June 2025, our powerful armed forces have no qualms about firing back with everything we have in a renewed attack. This isn't a threat, but a reality I feel I need to convey explicitly.
Well, I think we have to, at this point, just looking at the sanity quotient with the Trump administration between Tel Aviv or Israel and Washington, it's not a good equation. And then the potential for using or deploying nuclear weapons, I think the probability is I don't want to say high, but higher than before, because the stakes are just incredible. For Israel, this is an existential moment, and it was demonstrated, as Larry said, conventionally, that Iran, if the United States didn't stop to intervene at the end of the 12-day war, I really think the battering that Israel was receiving, if that had gone on for another 14 days, that had this very strong potential of completely destabilizing the Netanyahu government and Israeli society. Because you have to remember, Israel was so desperate at that time that they put a restriction on people leaving Israel while they're being pelted by Iranian missiles. I mean, just imagine that you're getting pelted every night from the sky, and your government saying that you can't leave, because the Israeli government was really worried that they would lose control of a lot of their reservists militarily. They're still managing the debacle in Gaza. So, for them, it is an existential issue. For the Trump administration, it's an existential issue, too, because it's a credibility issue. And I might add, when we saw both True Promise 1 and 2, if you looked at and Larry quite rightly points the finger at Jordan, and even if Iraq closed its airspace against any Israeli or U.S. Strikes on Iran, that would just make an incredible difference. It would be night and day. It would really restrict Israel and the U.S. But if you look at what was activated, so just think about that, from Djibouti to Diego Garcia to the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, all the naval assets that the U.S. had parked off the coast of the Levant, northwards of Incirlik Air Force Base, all of the sort of 24 military facilities in northeastern Syria, what's left in Iraq, as well as the other positions that the U.S. have in the region, in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, etc. But the fleet in Bahrain, all of that, and you really needed to understand at that moment. You saw that all of that activated. All of that was activated. So the entire military footprint of the United States of America in West Asia has one purpose, and we saw that purpose demonstrated twice. It is to provide a defense perimeter and an envelope of protection for the state of Israel, which is the size of New Jersey. So if that's what it takes and what that costs per year, we talk about our aid to Israel, add in all of the cost aggregate of all of that. That's including in the annual cost of defending the state of Israel that the U.S. pay for. Okay, that was made very clear during those two exchanges, what that means. So if that's what it takes for this little tiny state to exist and to do what it's been doing, to carry out the rampage that it's been carrying out against its neighbors for decades, but especially in the last couple of years, is that sustainable? Like, tell me how financially, politically, the price that America and the region is paying for the state of Israel to wage war against all of its neighbors continuously is that really a price that people are going to pay indefinitely? I don't think so. And it's beginning to wear thin. You saw extremely brazen moves by the Saudi Arabians, by Turkey recently. You're seeing a reformation of interests and power blocks in the region. And so I think it's safe to say the Abraham Accords are DOA at this moment in time, because people are really realizing, and I think it was the strike on Qatar that Israel launched that really
Thought
sent
about that one.
it sent tremendous shockwaves through the region, because you realize that even a U.S. ally hosting a major U.S. military installation is not safe from this rogue state that the U.S. is hell-bent on protecting. But back to the original point, why is the U.S. attacking or threatening to attack Iran? The reason keeps changing. Originally, it was because they're developing nuclear weapons, even though the U.S.'s own intelligence assessment, which was presented by Tulsi Gabbard most recently, says that Iran is not pursuing a bomb. And Trump then threw Tulsi Gabbard, the DNI, under the bus. And instead of resigning under principle, she kept her mouth shut and stayed in the administration and took a back seat publicly as a result of that. She should have resigned at that moment in time. That would have been the best political move for her future. Now she is basically going to get carried down the drain of history with MAGA. But anyway, that aside, so Iran, now it's not the nukes, because Trump claims he destroyed their nuclear program. Now it's democracy. Now it's back to the Samantha Power model. And it's neoliberal responsibility to protect, or the John Bolton model as well. He also subscribes to that. So there's all of these different reasons, but it started with the nuclear question. And, the fraud of this cannot be accentuated enough. And that is, there was an agreement in place to contain any potential Iranian development and it was called the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. And Donald Trump, under the direct orders of Israel, pulled the rug out from under that in May of 2018. Why? And there was no reason given. Trump's reason was he did the thing with his hands. It's a bad deal. It's a terrible deal. I would have never signed this deal. It's a terrible, never said why it was a terrible deal. You had guarantors, the European Union, Russian Federation. I mean, you had plenty of international guarantors. I mean, that is about as good of a treaty or any ironclad multilateral agreement like that you would ever get. But it was, I think the U.S., factions within the U.S. always intended probably not to honor that agreement. The Europeans certainly didn't honor their financial obligations either. But the point is, that was the solution. And now you hear the geniuses in Washington, the foreign policy wonks, saying what we need now is some kind of a deal on Iran to make sure they're not going to pursue a nuclear weapon. I'm like, am I hearing this? So all of this carry on is all coming from Israel. So the U.S. foreign policy is not independent. It is Donald Trump, the Trump administration is completely captured by a foreign government and a foreign lobby operating freely within the United States, and they are dictating every single move the U.S. is making in the region. And I'm going to say lastly that this is the reason why the Ukraine-Russia negotiations are such a shambles. Because for Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, Ukraine-Russia is a side hustle. The only reason that they're in there is because of Gaza, because of Israel. And that's it. They have no knowledge, no interest. Not even Steve Witkoff can't even bother to learn the regions in Donbass. He doesn't care. All they care about is this new golf club, which Trump is setting up, called the Board of Peace. And the membership dues are pretty steep. It's about $1 billion a year, or $1 billion entry fee or something like that. And he's got a Doral, in Gaza on the Med. I mean, this is unbelievable. This thing, we can talk about this. This is one of the biggest scams you could possibly imagine. It's a non-state entity, effectively a corporate entity where Donald Trump has, even in a corporation, you can't be CEO for life, but yet in this model you can. And he's trying to basically use it as leverage to get other deals, like push the Russians and the Europeans via Ukraine, and then the Greenland deal as well. This whole thing could definitely collapse. It's beginning to look like a house of cards, because the timing of it, from Trump's point of view, I don't think they've thought everything out. and they're not getting the type of buy-in they're expecting in Gaza from the European partners, Russia or China. So we'll see what happens. But I can't believe that Europeans aren't coming out more broadly and more loudly to categorically reject this. And this is tied to Iran, because for Iran, the Gaza-Palestinian issue is central. And that's another thing people in the West don't understand, that's practically written into the Iranian constitution, that they will defend anybody who's oppressed, like the Palestinians.
You know, Saudi Arabia did not refuse, actually, or at least they verbally refused to allow their airspace to be used and to allow their, military installations that the U.S. hosts there to be used for a strike on Iran this time around. And when Patrick brought up the Qatar strike from earlier 2025, that I was like, wow, I completely forgot about that. But that is very true. There is this, there definitely is this tension, and there were reports that the Gulf countries supposedly were part of this, and Turkey too, part of this effort to stop Trump. But your reactions to all of this, and even the Board of Peace, it's even worse, Patrick, I think, when you were mentioning I think it's like you need to pay $1 billion within the first year to get permanent membership. If you can stay there for 3 years, if you don't pay the $1 billion to Donald Trump himself, but if you don't, but you have to leave after 3 years. So I guess he thinks that you'll have egg on your face as a country if you don't do that. It's a complete and utter farce, but it does also negate the fact that, as you said earlier, Hamas and the resistance is still there and likely still going to be governing. So it's going to end up in a big clash too, which brings me to you, Colonel Wilkerson. The Trump administration can't even address this situation in Gaza, which is a very, was it the size of Washington, D.C., a prison camp that just experienced genocide?
I think the Omani foreign minister, who represents a country who, in my view, is the quintessential diplomatic entity within the Levant, was right when he said categorically, the cause of instability in this region is Israel. And our press didn't pay a lot of attention to that, understandably so. Our press is pretty much owned by Israel, or at least significant editorial boards and sections of it are. New York Times leading the pack. He's right. He's absolutely right. And increasingly, people are being unable to deny that. Whether it's to their own oppressed publics or whether it's to themselves or whether it's to both is really irrelevant. They're beginning to realize that that is the problem. So as was just hinted at or said, I guess, the Abraham Accords are dead. Any kind of reconciliation between the Arab states and Israel, I think, is dead, at least for a generation, if Israel even exists that long. I don't think it will. A more important point to me, though, is in this Gaza thing, we are seeing what I call an attempt to build a Hobbesian world in its most garish, raw concept. What we're seeing is Bibi Netanyahu making statements, for example, like, well, phase 2 is really irrelevant to me. I don't see anything happening in phase 2 that would be relevant to me at all. At the same time, Francesca Albanese, for example, has released a report that says, for example, among other criticisms, harsh criticisms of Israel, that probably underneath the rubble, we are going to bury not 60,000, not 70,000, not even 100,000, but closer to 500 to 600,000 dead Palestinians, 75% of whom are women and children. I have no problem believing that because I've worked with, and I know it's a lot more sophisticated now. I'd love to see somebody in Hexas Pentagon do this. I suspect they have. You take the tool that the military has essentially for bomb damage assessment. It's much more sophisticated than that. And it is sophisticated. And you look at the material that the homes were built of, that the streets were built of, that the basements are fabricated from, that the water system is made of. You look at all the infrastructure, in other words, in minute detail. You look at the density of the population. You look at the approximate area in terms of its whole the whole situation. You look at the ordnance dropped on them, and you don't just look at 250 and 500 and 1,500 and 2,750, 2,000 pound bombs, all of which have been dropped relentlessly. You also look at 155 howitzers and howitzers bigger, howitzers smaller. You look at artillery, in other words. You look at mortars, 4 deuces, 181s. You look at everything in terms of ordnance delivered in both quantity and method. And you look at other factors that impact on anything like this. There are about 10 criteria. And you can say pretty much within 3 to 5% how many people are dead. And if you do that, you'll find at least 200,000. So what are we going to do with these 200 dead people? I'll give you 3 guesses, and the first 2 don't count. A bulldozer like the one that killed Rachel Corrie, and many more of them are going to go out over this territory and smooth it over. And we're going to have a graveyard for at least 100, maybe 200,000, maybe more Palestinians, 75% of whom are women and children. That's what Bibi's plan is. That's what Trump understands, I'm pretty sure, and apparently exceeds to. That's what we're going to do. This is probably the greatest atrocity in this century to this point. And I've looked at Sudan. I've looked at a lot of other places. This is, and it grows in its dimensions because the empire has enabled it fully. I think of Gaza, and this, he's going to turn it into the United Nations, he said recently. This is going to be the new United Nations, this board. With such characters as Tony Blair in there, it's going to be a great United Nations. I'd like to see Blair be the new Gutierrez, UN Secretary General. And, I forgot to mention that the United Nations despicably put its imprimatur on this whole thing with a UN Security Council resolution instead of condemning it outright. If Kofi Annan had been there, he would be up on his chair condemning everything that we've done there. But we've got a gutless son of a gun as the UN Secretary General. That's what I think of Gaza.
Trump and Israel both basically put a gun to the UN Security Council's head saying, if you don't approve of this resolution, we are going to go take all of the gloves off again and massacre Palestinians like we were 6 months ago. So that was kind of the deal. And you had no words from Gutierrez criticizing that. But Patrick, what does it say before we get to Greenland and Europe in NATO and this whole debacle before we lose Colonel Wilkerson here? But I wanted to just get your final thoughts on this. What does this all say about the U.S. at this point, the empire, Donald Trump's administration, when the very thought that this peace board is going to work at all in Gaza is kind of a joke. I don't think anybody thinks this, but at the same time, you have the administration also, thumping its chest about destroying Iran. It seems like there's not a lot of possibilities for any of these things, but it almost reeks of desperation. What's your assessment of how these two things relate?
I will answer that, but just a caveat to what Larry mentioned there regarding the devastation there, I will say as well, there's also a certain percentage of unexploded ordinances. And I mean, the number is unbelievable. If you think about, like, for instance, I'm currently in Plymouth in the UK, and they just found an unexploded ordnance from the Luftwaffe that was 5 meters underground when they were doing a recce on a building site. So they had to shut down the whole city block, and it took 3 days to remove this ordnance safely, and they usually bring it out to sea. So there's EOD teams dealing with old unexploded ordnances. I also witnessed this when I was in Hungary as well. They have a huge riverine EOD team that works the Danube, as well as unexploded ordnances all over Europe. So if you think about the toxic waste dump, as well as the DU, depleted uranium potential, as well as EOD, unexploded ordinances. I mean, even if the Palestinians stay in Gaza, they have to deal with this. These are U.S. unexploded ordnances, by the way, most of them. They're going to have to deal with this for generations. I was in Lebanon. I did a documentary about cluster bombs that Israel had dropped in South Lebanon that U.S. MAG teams are still cleaning up, and Israel refused to give the data, which they have all the sortie data of where those bombs were dropped, and refused to give those to international authorities so that they could quickly identify and deal with the disposal of all of these unexploded ordnances. And many kids have been killed in South Lebanon over the years as a result of this, partly because these things look like toys. But just to put that in perspective, that Americans have no idea the damage that has been wrought. And that will continue for generations. That's firstly. Back to the original thing. The Board of Peace is designed to circumvent and basically to push aside international law. And at the moment this has been presented, Israel sent a wrecking crew to destroy and demolish the UNRWA, the UN Relief and Works Agency offices in Jerusalem. I mean, can you believe this? So, everybody should be up in arms about this, but this is what part of Gaza and the legacy of this with the Trump administration is to dismantle and dismantle the UN. They pulled out of all of these UN bodies recently, and Israel has blocked international aid, 66 organizations, I believe, or 37, I can't remember the number, at the same time. So there's a war going on here that extends into multilateral institutions. So this is part of the dismantling. This is absolute Hobbesian international politics and power politics, and it should frighten everybody, because that's Trump's trying to supplant international cooperation and agreements with these sort of fake corporate Ponzi schemes and MLM type organizations where you got to pay in and all this other stuff, and to exist in perpetuity, that he will be, in his family and his inner circle, will be the beneficiaries ultimately of this, and use that to leverage other deals in other places. I mean, it's so insidious. And the last thing I'm going to say is I'm so sick watching Trump at Davos talking about, I stopped 8+ wars. What wars did Donald Trump stop? Is there any actual documented proof of this? Or is it just we're going on his word that he made a phone call to Modi? Because a lot of these wars that he claims he stopped, we're hearing from political leaders in those countries that say that Donald Trump didn't stop those wars. So I'm going to go out on a limb, Danny and Larry, and I would wager that Donald Trump has stopped 0 wars out of the 8+ wars that he's claiming, and that he has started a war, unprovoked war in Yemen, Venezuela, Iran, threatening Denmark, and Gaza counts because the U.S. is absolutely a co-belligerent in Gaza. So he has started and carried on with 1, 2, 3, 4. So I see +4 wars, not -8+, which Trump is claiming. So I think it's a load of BS, and it's sad to watch the right-wing press in America repeat these tropes constantly. The Trump, I hear it on right-wing talk radio all the time when you're driving in America. 8+ wars, 8+. Where's this coming from? Where's the documentation of this? It's a total pile of refuse, and it's being used to bolster his credibility as a peace president or some kind of international broker of peace and goodwill. It's a complete fraud on a level that is just unbelievable and hard to comprehend, really, because nobody has actually challenged the provenance of this audacious claim that he keeps making and puts on the front of his, it's the placard on his door of Mr. International Peace, 8+ wars. I mean, it's unbelievable.